Our speaker this evening is Jennifer Bousselot, PhD. Jennifer is an associate professor of horticulture in the Department of Horticulture and Landscape Architecture at Colorado State University. Jen and her graduate students study green roof plant pollinator interactions, green roof system stormwater capture, rooftop agriculture, and the integration of solar panels on green roofs, also known as rooftop agrivoltaics. Jen is the editor of the North American Academic Green Roof and Wall Journal, the Journal of Living Architecture. She is the former research chair on the board of directors for the North American Green Roof Trade Organization, Green Roofs for Healthy Cities. Jen is an accredited green roof professional and coordinates the Colorado Regional Center for Excellence in Living Architecture, both designated by the Green Infrastructure Foundation. So we're very happy to have her here this evening with us to discuss green roofs for home gardeners. And I'm going to go ahead and let her take over, and I will see you all at the end of the presentation.
Thank you so much, Alicia. Wow, such a kind welcome. And every time I hear that description, I'm like, wait, who are you talking about? Oh, really? Okay, yeah, I guess I do those things. It's pretty wild to be at this point in my career, and I'm actually really delighted to talk to this group specifically. I actually grew up in Iowa. I'm a proud two-time Iowa State University alumni, and I even came back for 2 years in horticulture to teach classes and be the statewide Master Gardener Coordinator. So for me, this is a little bit of coming home. And so I was really delighted when Alicia reached out and made this request. I often come to the Shade Tree Short Course too. I've done that 2 or 3 times, I think, since I've moved back to Colorado. So it's wonderful to be back to my roots. Hopefully you can all see my screen, and I bet you're all wondering, what in the world is a green roof? And so I'm going to actually tell you about that. They can take many forms, just like any form of gardening. And as a native Iowan, when I moved out to Colorado, I had to figure out a way to farm and garden in the city to follow my high school sweetheart, also from Iowa, his career. So I want to start by just sharing a little bit of information. So, as I said, I'm an Iowa farm kid. I'm actually from just outside DeWitt, Iowa. I even have a classmate listening tonight. And so I was delighted when he reached out last week to let me know he was going to join. And so there's the farm I grew up on. It's corn and soybean, although when I was very young, in the 70s and 80s, we had a 5-year rotation and about 4 types of livestock. So raised definitely on a farm, and originally I couldn't see myself really going past those boundaries. But life and chances took me many places. So here I am on a recently planted green roof, which is actually my very own. It took about 20 years for me to be able to have my own research area at my institution, Colorado State University. And here I am also actually standing beside solar panels on a rooftop. So as Alicia mentioned, one of my specialties is rooftop agrivoltaics, which I sort of accidentally backed into. I have a TED talk on that subject if you're interested. It's on TED.com or YouTube if you'd like to check it out. So I just recently earned tenure at Colorado State University. So I'm an associate professor of horticulture. And my team specializes in urban agriculture and green roofs specifically. And it's a real delight. This is my other alma mater, actually, is Colorado State University. So it's great to be back at that home institution. I teach 4 classes a year. I have several hundred students every single year. I teach most of them at a distance, kind of like this. In fact, I used to do the Master Gardener trainings about half the year, spring and fall, every Tuesday, Thursday night. That's where I got all of my my hundreds of hours of screen time broadcasting for that. So it's a delight to be able to do it again for this cohort and all those that are interested in gardening in Iowa. So my primary area of research is green roofs. I have a large team. You'll get to see a glimpse of them as we go. I've also co-authored a number of books. I'm very lucky. I have a mentor who actually got his PhD in botany at the University of Iowa in the 1950s. His name is Jack Carter. Unfortunately, he passed away at the very beginning of COVID, the week that COVID closed down the US. And thankfully, he passed on his legacy. He had three separate titles. The most popular one is Common Southwestern Native Plants, but also he wrote Trees and Shrubs of New Mexico and Trees and Shrubs of Colorado. And so I just redid, unfortunately, right as he had his final illness and was passing, we were updating Trees and Shrubs of New Mexico. I've contributed a couple chapters to a book by my colleague Bruce Dvorak at Texas A&M on eco-regional green roofs. And I am just about to release a new book called Trees and Shrubs of Colorado. Here's a fun teaser layout of what it looks like. So it's about a 360-page dichotomous key. And it was my late mentor Jack's biggest dream was to take that key, which he actually created over 24 years as a botany and biology professor at Colorado College. He created it to teach his students with, and then he translated it into a book, which was a huge undertaking. He first published it in 1990, and his second edition was in 2006. And here we will be 20 years later doing the third edition, and we took it from just a key, which only certain specialists could use, and we're turning it into a true field guide. So it has line drawings, images, distribution maps, and more detailed descriptions. So it was a labor of love. It took me 6 years actually to finish that. So it's a real delight. And I'm a speaker, so I speak internationally all the way to the national scale. I'm sorry, all the way to the local scale. So it's a delight to have you all as an audience tonight. This was my humble beginnings, at least in the green roof world. So I actually, as soon as I graduated with my master's in sustainable agriculture from Iowa State University, we moved out for my husband's career here to Colorado. So this is a picture of me on a green roof. It's a half an acre green roof in downtown Denver, Colorado. If you've ever been there, this is a half acre green roof right next to Union Station. So it's as downtown as it gets. That was a big culture shock for this Iowa farm kid that was not used to seeing a lot of lights except the other homesteads nearby, up to major high rises. So as I joked, this was my way to be able to interact with plants in an urban area. So it's interesting. This was for my doctoral research at Colorado State University, and I actually had left a job as the CSU horticulture agent in Douglas County, Colorado. That's south of the metro area, rodeo country there, ranches and rodeos there a lot, and went back to school for this degree. And the solar panel array behind me was a bit of a surprise. So this was the regional headquarters for that four-state region of the EPA, and the several researchers and practitioners that were part of the EPA collaborated. So we co-wrote with the folks at the EPA about a $300,000 grant to fund my research and then several other projects at the same time, all associated with quantifying the benefits of putting plants on a roof. At first, that was a strange thing for me. I'll never forget the day my master gardener in Douglas County came into my office and said, "Hey, I work for the EPA and we need a horticulturalist to help us advise for a new building that we're going to put a green roof on." And I said, "A green what?" So, as you may have surmised, green roofs literally are a vegetation on tops of buildings. Now, that sounds simple. I'm going to actually walk through some of the details because it's not as simple as that on how to construct a green roof. And then I'll give you some additional guidelines on resources to follow up with that I'll include in the chat. So that solar panel array was a colleague of mine at the EPA. He was a solar engineer and he was super excited about using that roof also for rooftop solar, which is a very common use in urban areas for rooftops. Well, I was furious because my research, I didn't want anything influencing my research. And this was at the very edge of the designated research area. And all the EPA scientists thought, well, yeah, of course they're going to be all grouped together. But this plant scientist was furious. However, it has turned into a happy accident. We sort of accidentally discovered that there's a wonderful synergy between the partial shade provided by solar panels on a green roof and the plants themselves. So the plants actually evaporatively cool the backside of those solar panels, so they operate most efficiently. In fact, on a hot day in any city or any location where there's solar panels, once you get past about 110 degrees, those panels have almost shut off. They're not operating. We always think intuitively that the hotter and sunnier the conditions, the better. And that's not the case. It's actually quite the opposite. And then the solar panels actually shade the plants. We have a lot of sun here in Colorado, and they partially shade the plants to help protect them from the midday heat and sun. So that's what led to all my future work on that aspect. And I've had a lovely career, been back and forth to Iowa one time. Here's a whole bunch of press I've had, and it's quite grandiose. This is actually a picture of the California Academy of Sciences green roof. That's too pie in the sky for me. This is fancy and not necessarily realistic for everyone. So instead, I like the more approachable. I'm kind of pausing because I'm figuring most of you are chuckling. Version of green roofs, which you can do in your own backyard. I'm going to show you how to make this birdhouse green roof in very simple terms. So let me just describe what a green roof really can do. So as urbanization consumes more land, impervious surfaces also increase. I grew up in Iowa. I think the majority of the viewers here are probably in Iowa based on the comments. And you might think you don't have a lot of impervious surfaces because you can see so much farmland. However, over half of your population, in fact, it was the 1980s when half of the Iowa population moved into cities. And those cities have all kinds of surfaces. So they're roads, parking lots, buildings. And I've even consulted on a number of green roofs in especially Des Moines, with one of the most beautiful examples being the Des Moines Public Library that was built on the last green space in the downtown Des Moines area. So a lot of things that weren't a problem when all of our land was available to put plants, whether it's crops, pasture, or gardening. However, as we pave over these spaces, all of a sudden we need to start to manage some things that come along with it, especially this aspect of managing storm water. And it's an increasingly important issue in Iowa as well. In fact, that's my husband's entire career, is actually managing stormwater in urban and especially from rural to urban areas. It is a billion-dollar industry in Colorado alone. I have no doubt it's on its way there in Iowa too. And so when we moved back to Iowa for those few years, when I was statewide master gardener coordinator, he was very busy in his consulting firm working on that. Other things like the urban heat island effect become an issue. So as I remember growing up on the farm, and it was always cooler, whether that was summer or winter, out on the farm compared to in DeWitt. And that's a small town in comparison to a lot of cities in Iowa. And you can also sort of on an even smaller scale understand what the urban heat island effect is if you're barefoot in the summer on a sunny day. It's much cooler to stand on the turf grass than it is on the concrete of the sidewalk. So that effect actually increases. And so I helped about 10 years ago with an ordinance to help reduce our urban heat island here in Denver, Colorado, which is 10 degrees hotter in our city than it is in the rural surrounding areas. And I can watch when I drive from my office in downtown Denver to the suburbs where I live, I can see that 10 degrees, that transition dramatically every day when I drive, summer or winter. And then eventually, especially in ultra urban areas, there's less and less land available. Now, not the case necessarily in Iowa. However, there are many mega cities that require space to help with food security. And then there's many areas of the planet that actually have very poor soils. Colorado is one of them. We have very clayey soils, and it's a challenge to grow a lot of our crops in those soils. So let's just talk about a couple of these benefits that are beyond just what I mentioned. So there's other additional benefits, such as being able to sequester additional carbon in spaces usually that are just a carbon source. One of the biggest private benefits is the lifespan of the rooftop. So in just our anecdotal evaluations, we see the lifespan of a flat sloped roof go from 15 to 20 years up to 50 or more because the two things that break down rooftop membranes, it's not the same as your shingles, but there's some very parallel, right? The shingles on your house. And it's the freeze thaw cycle that occurs daily during the winter, and the other one is ultraviolet light. So light hitting your roof. And so putting a green roof on it actually protects those two things. We can improve energy efficiency of a building. The average across all building types is about a 10% energy efficiency. But if you have a single-story building that is poorly insulated, you can dramatically improve your energy efficiency in both the summer and the winter. And then one of my favorite things, because I was always looking at the edges of fields growing up, is increased biodiversity. So spaces for other things to survive, right? Our pollinators, our beneficial wildlife. Sometimes we get frustrated with the frustrating wildlife, and our species diversity. So let me just explain. There's really two types of green roofs. If you just read a single article on this from a magazine or your favorite source, you'll see a little bit of vocabulary. So I like to talk about that a little bit. So the first one would be an intensive green roof. So we think of those as very deep green roofs. So they're greater than 6 inches deep. This is a picture of a green roof that's 18 inches deep. And it's got trees, shrubs, a walking path, all those kinds of things going on. It's actually on a retail center, an outdoor fitters called REI. They had people ride their mountain bikes through there to test them out. So it was ideal for that because they didn't have any space on the ground for it. So they're very much like raised beds, highly diverse in species, and then actually plant life forms, right? Trees, shrubs, grasses, forbs, and even ground covers. And then the more common type is actually what we call an extensive green roof. So they sound very similar, intensive and extensive, but that's because of the way that those two terms were translated from the original green roof literature in German. And so they sound a lot alike in English and not necessarily as much alike in German. At least that's what I've heard. I don't speak German. So those are green roofs that are very shallow. So they're usually 6 inches in in soil depth or shallower. And they have a lower plant profile in terms of species diversity. However, if you can see me, the picture behind me is a green roof that can grow in less than 6 inches. So a very beautiful meadow or prairie. These are much lighter weight, so they're applied probably about 90% of the time. If you hear about a green roof, it's probably a shallow green roof, an extensive green roof. And we can even retrofit existing buildings with them. So just a few things about the soil. So I'm using the term substrate because I'm used to it every single day with my graduate students and my undergraduate students. But what I mean is essentially the growing medium. So that's we rarely include native soil or any real soils in them. And the main reason is most of our soils are very heavy when they're wet. And that doesn't pair well with the structural loading capacity of the majority of our buildings, right? And so there have been over decades since the 1960s when the modern green roof was born in Germany. There have been many tests that have evaluated, standardized, and made recommendations on the type of substrate that's ideal. So most of it is what we call expanded aggregate. So think kitty litter. In fact, that haydite, which the non-clump forming kitty litter is made of, is really common. In fact, the green roof that one of the a few green roofs I helped out with on Iowa State's campus when I was still there incorporated haydite as its primary material. Iowa has sources of haydite available. So the plants, the shallower the green roof system, the more succulent and drought tolerant those plants have to be. So most of those are what we call stone crops. Sedums are a common name for that. That's also its giant scientific genus name as well. So you'll see many pictures of sedums throughout here because they're so drought tolerant. They can handle those poor soils that are very shallow and well drained. I look at lots of other types of plants. Native plants are probably the category I use the most on my research program, only because they provide so many resources for lots of our native pollinators. So there's a number of different plant characteristics that are necessary to consider if you're going to select a green roof plant. And little spoiler, here in a few minutes, I'm going to show you how to create a little miniature version on a birdhouse in your own home. So this truly will be green roofs for gardeners. We just had to get through a couple of the basics first. So one of the most important characteristics is that the plants be a ground cover. So I took this picture actually at an Iowa Gardens gardener's home. It was actually Gary Wittenbaugh. And he had this lovely sedum. This is a sedum album or white sedum. This one's a selection of, I believe it was Coral Carpet was the one that he had there, although it could have been another selection. So the nice thing is you can start with a small plant and it covers the ground very rapidly. That helps ensure that green roofs are more affordable for the majority. So I mentioned the Des Moines Public Library green roof. That's a full acre green roof. And I was so proud of my home state. I was actually in Colorado at the time, working on my PhD, but they broke the bottom out in terms of price per square foot at that time, and this was in the early 2000s, where it was only $8 a square foot to install that 43,000 and change square foot space. So I was really proud of that. They took a whole bunch of different species of sedums, mowed them, and broadcast them on that roof. So it's pretty remarkable. You could have accent plants, lots of succulents. This is one from my doctoral research. This is a lovely little cactus native to Colorado. It's a Puncha fragilis or fragile prickly pear, and we had a fuchsia bloomed one. It was absolutely lovely. It was a showstopper. Everyone had to ask what that plant was. So there's a number of great species that can be used on green roofs. And as I mentioned, the deeper the profile, the higher diversity you can aim for. And so I have green roofs that are from 4 inches deep all the way up to 18 inches deep across my portfolio of projects that I work on. So it can be annuals like these California poppies. They make a wonderful green roof plant. Doesn't matter where the climate is because that greener substrate is well drained, which is what they need. Perennials, succulents, grasses all make great plants. So here's a lovely little perennial. This is actually a plant that's native all the way around the northern part of the globe. So this one is often called Scottish bells or Irish bells. Out here, it's our common bellflower in Colorado. Here's several species of sempervivums or hens and chicks. Those were the original green roof plant. In fact, in ancient times in Europe, it was considered good luck to have one of these. And they used to be called house leeks, not like a leak on the roof, but Leek. And it was considered good luck for you to have those on your roofs. And then here's actually a picture from a colleague of mine. He's fairly recently retired from the University of Nebraska, where it's all short grass to tall grass prairie. And so this is actually our state grass, Blue Grama, Budula gracilis. And that, no matter where you're located in North America, is an excellent plant also for green roofs. We also consider other things like winter interest. Even though people don't expect a lot out of their gardens in the winter on the grounds, they do on the roof. And so we definitely evaluate that. It's ideal with shallow green roof substrates or soils to have those plants that have shallow fibrous roots because if they have a tap root, which is a perfectly fine thing, but there may not be adequate water because those roots have evolved to access deep, stable supplies of water, and green roofs are not very deep, and they're usually not that stable in their moisture content. They dry out quickly on purpose because water is the greatest weight contributor to a green roof and obviously very drought tolerant. So anything that you see on a little hillock or rise or the top side of foothills, those are all good plants to use. Now, I'll just briefly breeze over this, but the nice thing about green roofs, and this in the background is a picture of a very diverse green roof that's in Europe. Europe was definitely the birthplace and the predominant location for green roofs to begin. And then about the turn of the century is when they became popularized here in the US. Now I have lost count on how many acres of green roofs we have in North America. There's most of the major cities have various ordinances or incentives to encourage greening of rooftops. So they're all over the place. But the Europeans did a great job getting those all figured out. So we get all kinds of additional ecosystem services, like we mentioned in the benefits, that come out of a green roof just like they come out of any greened area, whether it's a remnant of native prairie in Iowa, a landscape, a pasture, all of those kinds of things. We get all of a sudden water and food for other organisms, nutrient cycling and pollination occurring, climate control, and then recreational benefits. So green roofs can provide these, especially in urban areas. Although I have to say, one of my dreams is to go move back into a rural area, especially one that has some elevation change, put a green roof on top of my building, and it looks like on my house, it looks like it's just right into that hillside. So I think there's lots of lovely little ways to incorporate green roofs. So, let me just click ahead. If you're not familiar, here's an excellent book that talks about all these benefits. It's actually for just gardens in general, Bringing Nature Home. And then Doug Tallamy, he's a faculty member at University of Delaware. He's also written Nature's Best Hope, and he actually has um, uh, a nationwide effort available. You can find it online, and you can join his effort to contribute your garden into the nationwide Bringing Nature Home effort. So I highly recommend it. It's wonderful, and he's an excellent speaker if you ever get a chance to hear him. So let me just go through a couple of pictures of projects that I've helped out with. So this is a green roof that was installed in 2007 at the Denver Botanic Gardens. Here's a green roof that was installed in, I believe it was 2012, at the Community College of Denver, so right downtown. This is what it looks like in the winter. It actually looks like a mimic of our prairie. And my graduate student just started research on that. Here's a green roof at a residential location in the mountains near Nederland, Colorado. This family, a retired faculty member from my other rival, which is CU Boulder, um, wanted to be able to look out over their property, see the green roof, and it blend into the hillside right next to it. So we collected seed and broadcast it. I did a plant survey several years ago. This green roof, and these are some pictures, much more modern pictures from that because it was 2008 install, and these are pictures from 2020 during COVID when no one had anything to do, and I could do this outside. So I did an inventory of the species. So there were some fascinating plant discoveries in there that spontaneously made it up there. This is a lovely green roof. If you ever make it to Colorado, specifically Denver, you have to make time for the Denver Botanic Gardens. So their parking garage houses one of the largest green roofs in North America that is also publicly available. So this is a full acre green roof on the parking garage. My colleague that I mentioned earlier, Bruce Dvorak, that wrote Ecoregional Green Roofs, he named this the North America's most diverse green roof, and it has somewhere just south of 500 plant species on this roof. We've published a number of articles off of researching on this green roof and made some really incredible fun discoveries. And then we applied those discoveries on one of my green roofs. This is actually Colorado State University it feels like it just built a series of 3 buildings, another campus. Our main campus is in Fort Collins, an hour north, but we are right next to downtown Denver, where the National Western Stock Show holds their annual stock show every January. And so this is a 18-inch deep green roof that started in 2022. And then we actually have one on another building. So Terra is its building name. So here's some more pictures. This is actually one of our Colorado native plants. It is Indian paintbrush, Castanea integra. It is a hemiparasitic plant, and it has defied regular cultivation on any kind of scale because of its hemiparasitic nature. So what that means, it is a parasitic plant that actually feeds off the roots of a host plant. And but it does have a little bit of photosynthetic tissue. You can see some green just below those flowering bracts. And that plant will actually produce some of its own chlorophyll, but it requires for its success to be associated with another plant. The remarkable thing with this green roof is that this plant just blooms its brains out every single year. We're coming up on the 4th growing season where it will be back, and it does so 6 weeks earlier on the green roof compared to on the ground. So we have a series of publications. They're very dense, rigorous publications. But what's really exciting about the results is that we've sort of also accidentally discovered that plants actually bloom between 2 weeks and 6 weeks earlier on a green roof than on the ground. And that's remarkable because as our pollinators are coming out earlier and earlier in the spring, they need resources, especially our native pollinators. So we have 947 species of native bees in Colorado. You have a couple hundred, I'm not sure how many in Iowa, I've forgotten, that are not European honeybees. Now, honeybees use all these plants as well, but those native bees don't necessarily have resources. And so getting plants to bloom earlier. So our theory is, although we haven't definitively tested it, is that the green roofs are warmer, the substrate or the soil is warmer than our gardens on the ground. So soil temperature greatly influences flowering timing. So a warmer, drier green roof will bloom faster. So there's just a few more beautiful pictures of it. That one's one of my favorite pictures. I do a lot of consulting on green roofs. These are two buildings that are actually in existence, believe it or not, here in Denver, Colorado. The one on your left is the One River North, and the one on your right is Populous. Here's a picture of Populous from just this last summer. So we had essentially a little meadow up on that roof. So this is my team, including my major professor from my PhD standing right next to me. It's all these people that do all the heavy lifting, all the data collection, plant management, and all of that. They're a wonderful crew. So I just have a couple pictures of them, but I'll click through a couple images. This is that Denver Botanic Gardens location again. This is a green roof on my department's building on the main campus at Colorado State University in Fort Collins. A number of graduate students have completed their research up there. There's a few more pictures of the Terra Green Roof. On my team, we either grow plants for food or we grow plants for pollinators. And so you'll see actually a squash vine growing up on the HVAC screening wall there. We had planted three sisters there since that's culturally significant. Chili peppers do wonderful up there. Even okra. We were really surprised in fairly cool Colorado how okra does. So here's a couple of pictures of, this is our hydro building. So this is a much larger green roof research area that incorporates those solar panels. So that's where most of our research efforts are transitioning to. Here we were doing a shade tolerant crop, which is, believe it or not, chili peppers project for the student in the middle. These are all three graduate students of mine. The student in the middle, Eliza, successfully defended her thesis on this subject. Chili peppers are a massive crop here in Colorado. We also grow lots of wildflowers on there. In fact, we've taken our experience even further. On the left, you see essentially that wild, beautiful prairie, which my graduate student Maria is studying. On the left, we actually have saffron. So you're not mistaken, that's a crocus. But saffron, if you weren't aware, is actually, believe it or not, a crocus plant. It's just a fall blooming crocus. One of the most valuable plants on the planet, which we have to focus on because it's expensive to build these systems. So we have to make sure they're economically supported. So this is the fun part. I'm going to click through and show in just a few minutes how to construct this little birdhouse green roof. Isn't it fun? So this is actually in the backyard. These pictures were in the backyard of my Ames, Iowa house. We had about a third of an acre and we farmed most of it for veggies, but I had to have some space for a little miniature green roof there. So a birdhouse was the most useful. You can really understand how they're constructed by this little series. And believe it or not, I've recorded this for use in at least one, if not more, ag Iowa Ag teachers' classrooms. So it's a delight to contribute to addition of agriculture still in Iowa. So here's all my materials. You see my little birdhouse. Anything that's a low slope or flat roof is ideal. Here's my waterproof membrane because you can't put any kind of building together without waterproofing on the roof to make sure you don't cause rot or collapse in the future. My drainage layers, my filter fabric that goes on top of my drainage layer, and I'll explain all these as I go. This is my green roof substrate. I'll tell you what that blend is. And then these are little cuttings from another one of my gardens. So they're all sedums and hens and chicks. Here are all my other little tools to make it happen. So the first task was to waterproof that. So you just use staples. As long as water can shed off of it, you can penetrate that membrane. So you see the little staples there. Water doesn't cling. When I flip it back up, it's not going to cling there. So it sheds right off. We just use some roof flashing, and there's a number of different products out there. This was one we just bought at one of the big box stores, and we formed it by using. We still have those sets of scissors actually. We formed it. This is my husband as the model to make it fit by just cutting little slits in the areas. We allowed drainage holes, so we just used a flathead screwdriver to puncture a few holes in there to allow for free drainage at the bottom end. We applied with roofing tacks the edging to that roof, and it secured it nice and snug. Sometimes you have to play with that a little bit to make sure that it's very snug so it doesn't rip off. So then I'm ready to apply my layers because I've constructed the edging around and then the waterproofing on it. So my first layer, all I took was a broken clay pot. That's actually not very far off of what we used for our drainage layer. An alternative would be lava rock. And we need that layer because we want the excess water to drain out as quickly as possible, and make sure we don't end up with water sitting on that green roof. Then we put in our filter fabric. So the filter fabric actually acts as a layer to prevent the fine particles that are in the substrate or the soil from filtering through into that drainage layer and clogging it up. You can end up with an issue with water ponding if you allow that to happen too long. So all I used was a double layer of woven landscape fabric for that. It's different than what we have, but not dramatically different than what we use at commercial scale. There are woven fabrics that we use that are more synthetic materials that have a longer life and they're a little bit thicker. They look like felt, actually. And then I trimmed it up. The rest packed in my substrate. So all I used for the substrate was actually I ended up having some expanded clay. That's another one of the aggregate names that we can use. But you can just use a non-clump forming kitty litter bag. Just make sure it's not the clump forming or that turns into a solid mass as soon as it's wet. And I mixed it about 1/3 of regular good potting mix with 2/3 kitty litter. And then that's essentially it. If you can find a really good quality succulent mix that has lava rock mixed into it or something similar, that's another good alternative. And then, since all these plants actually root by cutting, all I had to do was place them in. So I decided to have an interesting little arrangement, but you can grow anything you like on it. Now, I do have to warn you, that's a very shallow system, so it does need water fairly frequently. Treat it like your pots that are out front at your house or on your deck or patio at home. So in the summer, you need to water it probably every day, a little sprinkle. It doesn't need very much. It doesn't need to be saturated. It just needs to cool those plants down. And on really hot days when your petunias are wilting, then that probably needs two sprinklings. So I usually, when I make these, I usually water them at the same time in the morning and the evening on hot days when I before I go to work and when I get home. So, but that's a fun little way to incorporate it. Other gardeners want it on their sheds. I didn't even show you the various sheds, pergolas, and other ways that we incorporate green roofs like that. So there she is. We gave her a good dose of water. And then we had a an aspen that had died, so we cut it off, left it there, so that our dogs wouldn't bother the birds. And we did have a bird the first year nest inside of there, so it was an absolute delight. So this is a way to take a little tiny piece of green roofs into your garden. And with that, I would love to answer any questions you have.
Yeah, we have some really great questions. Thank you, Jen, for that wonderful presentation. Let's go ahead and get into some of those questions because, like I said, we have a lot of good ones. So, a lot of people were concerned about what the maximum pitch is that you can do one of these green roofs on because when we're thinking about our homes, right, a lot of them do not have flat or fairly flat roofs. So, what's the specifications for that?
Excellent question. And I have different iterations of this. In fact, I teach an entire graduate class on green roofs, and we have an entire lecture on sloped roofs. So I can't fit everything in, but that's an excellent question. So we've actually figured it out, and you can do green walls. I have not chosen to do that because gravity pulls that water out, which water is your most limiting factor. But we have all kinds of systems that are available on the market that can go from a dead flat zero slope roof all the way to vertical. Typically, what those require, though, is additional materials, and we call it most of the time baffling. And that's like it can be a very simple form of actually laying in uh, wood or metal to make sure that substrate doesn't slough off, all the way up to what looks like a waffle that you pour substrate into, an empty waffle, and plant plants right into it. So there are products available out there. In fact, this is the point where I like to mention there's a great book that a bunch of colleagues of mine, because the world of greeners is small, co-wrote. In fact, I'm good friends with three of the four authors. It's called Small Scale Green Roofs. You can find it on Amazon and multiple other options. So I'll type that in. In fact, let me stop sharing so I can start doing some of that. And what's next?
Well, that leads right into the next one, which people are always interested. What are some books, websites, resources that you would recommend for if people want to do this in their own house or at
Yes.
their own property? So I'll let you go ahead and put some of those things in the chat that you want to share. And then as everyone knows, I can grab those links and I can put them out on our website later so that if people maybe can't get them out of the chat, then we still have a way to share those around. So that would be
Totally. So
great.
let me just mention a couple things about the I put in there. So Small Scale Green Roofs is that book I mentioned. It's co-written by three authors, or four authors. One is stateside, the other three are from Europe. And they do a great job with that garden shed style of green roof. If you want to see a bunch of examples, and you can find several, including the Public Library of Des Moines, groups.com, and it will show you that's create that and manage that website. And essentially, it's a database for green roofs and green infrastructure, mostly in North America, but they do go beyond sometimes. And then greenroofs.org is the North American Trade Organization for Green Roofs and Walls. They're a nonprofit out of Toronto, and they host the annual conferences, and they have all kinds of resources. That's where I became a green roof professional. So they have all kinds of training on there. That's all virtual. You can take it online if it really interests you. And then the journal that we publish is also available on that website.
Okay, great. I will make sure I get those out on our home gardening website as well so that people can get the links there.
Mhm.
And then our next kind of batch of questions. So I know you can't go into great detail here because we only have a few minutes left, and I'm sure there's a lengthy list. But thinking about Iowa, and you used to live in Iowa, and thinking about our different climates, our different growing zones, there are a
Mhm.
few questions that kind of go together. And one is there a short list of a few plants that you would put at the top of your list for green roofs, specifically in Iowa, that would be
Mhm.
well acclimated to our climate?
Yes. So just like the picture behind me, you have all kinds of flowering natives. Those are top of my list. So you name it, we always call them DYZs, damn yellow composites. So anything that looks like a sunflower and grows very short. So green roof systems will always dwarf any plant you plant. So pick those kinds of plants. Avoid, because I think this is actually more important than the short list, avoid any garden thugs. So any very dominant grass, we have to select those species that are not dominant so that they don't turn that whole roof into a monoculture. And then I love the succulent. So you have a native opuntia, so the cactus, the prickly pear, humifosa, that's sensational on green roofs. And all the sedums look wonderful, especially because they have year-round winter interest and color.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And then you did talk a little bit about how the environment on the green roof is a little bit different than the environment around it, especially you said things you've seen through your research that things are blooming early, that it's warmer and drier in these environments. So when we're thinking about that and we're comparing it to the plant hardiness zone that we actually live in, and then we're considering that specific green roof environment. How does the hardiness zone change on the green roof? Are we able to do some zone pushing? Do we need to treat it like we're putting a perennial straight in the ground? Do we treat it more like a container? What would you say about all of that with our climate, zones, our plant hardiness zones?
That's an excellent question. So my safe answer on that is pick plants that have a wide range for what they're happy with. So say zone 4 to zone 6. So those plants that have the wide ranges will handle those extremes because they're very extreme conditions, just like you said. And actually the winter, you actually have better climate in Iowa than I do here in Colorado because the cold temperatures are rarely the problem. If it gets and it stays cold, those plants actually can go through the winter better than if it gets too hot during the day in the winter. So that's we actually saw problems with plants not overwintering, not because of temperatures, because of dryness.
Okay, good tip. And then you did talk about how green roofs can be used to help with food insecurity and that you can grow edible crops on green roofs, which I think we're all always looking for ways to increase the area that we can grow edible crops in. But are there any special considerations that people need to take for growing edibles on green roofs? Because you've already mentioned a few things that I think would contribute to special considerations for those crops.
For sure. So you want to focus on warm season crops that are especially suited to your zone because it does get so hot dry, windy. So tomatoes, peppers, all those kinds of plants do exceptionally well. In fact, they grow faster because the soil's warmer. In the spring, that's in Iowa, especially when it's damp and cloudy, that's actually when things slow down the most. So what you really want is to be able to plant that plant and really see it get going. Um, if you want, you can actually even, if you've got a sunny spot that you can put your green roof, you can actually even grow leafy greens in the fall and the spring. So, but they cannot, they will bolt on you as soon as June hits. So be aware of that. You can really just kind of get short-term leafy greens. One of the interesting things that I always like to note with that, at least out here in Colorado, we have a lot of problems with rabbits and deer. We have zero problems with rabbit and deer on our vegetables up on the green roof. I did see a squirrel come up there this year. It's actually gone after the seeds on our sunflowers. But otherwise, we don't have those kinds of problems. So it's a delight for that reason alone.
You mean you don't have flying deer that get up on the roofs and eat your crops
No,
that
what
you're growing up there?
we had grasshoppers that were as hungry as the deer because they didn't have their predators up there. So those little suckers just totally ruined an entire season of our data. It
Mm.
felt like we had deer.
Yeah, that's a whole new environment for them without their predators. Well, that leads really well into one other question that we had that I do really want to answer before we run out of time, which is how these roofs deal with animals. Specifically, someone
Mhm.
was thinking about squirrels and digging the acorns in, and then you're having to go and pull out these plants that you didn't put there that are now quote unquote weeds. So, what would you say about the whole animal green roof equation?
Yeah, thankfully, it's not a major issue. I did have a bird steal one of my plants from my PhD work, unfortunately. So there is some of that, and they have fewer predators there too. And squirrels are there, but you know when they're there. And the nice thing is, when you have a green roof, you can't let it go, at least during the growing season, more than a month at a time without really taking a look at it. So it's just about like any other sort of intensively managed garden area. And you'll notice that oak was starting to grow because that can become a problem if that root actually gets too large. It can penetrate that roofing membrane, which is the worst thing for a green roof.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And thank you for being here with us this evening.